Today is Thursday, February 20th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Illegal immigrants are using stolen social security numbers, but the jig might be up. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating if you haven't done that yet. Please do it. We'd appreciate it. And send us your thoughts directly to our inbox, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. Joining me now to get through the news of the cray, as we call it here. Each and every weekday, bright and early, we're doing just that. Trey Gons-Phillips, Billy Hallowell. Guys, on this Friday Junior edition of the Quick Start Podcast, on the focus story, we got the head of an organization that combats online anti-Semitism issuing a warning.
Yeah, this is Cyberwell, the head of Cyberwell. We're going to get into what she had to say about Kanye, anti-Semitism, and much, much more.
All right, looking forward to the details there. On the main thing, George Thomas from CBN's in Brazil. They're on the brink of a religious transformation. Evangelicals are set to outnumber Catholics. What is driving this revival shift here? He's got more on that coming up on the main thing. Make sure you're subscribed to all of our CBN News podcasts. You can find those and the links to them conveniently in the description of this podcast episode. And with that, we're going to head to the news in 90. And illegal immigrants and identity theft. A bombshell investigation revealed that illegal immigrants are fueling a massive identity theft crisis, stealing social security numbers to work in the U.S. A report from Real Clear Investigations finds that millions of stolen or fake social security numbers are being used with the SSA, the Social Security Administration, fraud file ballooning to nearly $2 trillion. Victims face tax bills for wages they never earned, direct credit, and even criminal records tied to the stolen IDs. Meanwhile, the federal government profits, raking in billions from illegal workers paying Social Security and Medicare taxes they'll never collect. Despite clear evidence, the IRS and SSA had refused to crack down, and laws blocking information sharing make enforcement nearly impossible. President Trump is turning up the heat on Ukrainian President Zelensky, called him yesterday a dictator without elections and blaming him for prolonging the war. Trump says Ukraine was left out of early U.S.-Russia peace talks because Zelensky's more interested in keeping America's quote-unquote gravy train going than ending the conflict. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. Guys, this Ukraine-Russia conflict has taken quite a turn. I think American people, a lot of them, there's a growing strand that are just sick and tired of and not trusting at all of what Ukraine is doing here. Even though Russia may have sparked this, they'll claim, as George Thomas said in a live stream that we did on YouTube earlier this week, said that perhaps Russia, there was at least some part of that, NATO and everything sort of provoking a little bit of a reaction. But at the end of the day, it rests on Putin for making that decision. But since that all happened, however you assign the blame for the start of the conflict, since that all has happened, initially people were supportive of helping Ukraine defend themselves. But that has soured, and people are feeling like perhaps the Ukrainian government is corrupt. We've heard that claim a lot, and we've seen evidence of that over the years. But the fact that hundreds of billions of dollars keep going there, and then Americans are struggling here, particularly with things like Hurricane Helene. You look at people struggling to get back on their feet there, and then they see $100 billion go over to Ukraine, and they get frustrated with that. And so I think Trump is tapping into that, but it is definitely becoming a very, very sticky situation as Trump is moving to try to negotiate and broker a peace deal here.
Well, there's two things that come to mind. It's really hard to call Zelensky a dictator if you're not going to call Putin a dictator.
Right,
I think that is, it's a little bit cringe. So, if you're concerned about elections and people staying in power, and that's your reason.
Putin got like 90% in the last election, so we all know what's up with that.
Yeah, exactly. But I also think on the flip side of that, that's going to terrify a lot of people and upset a lot of international order that Trump is doing that. But there could be strategy to this too, right? There could be reason why he's saying these things, reason why he's doing these things. knowing how to bring Russia to the table. The reality is, who knows how this war ends? It's been catastrophic. It's been horrific. And so he may be trying to angle, right, to get it to some sort of conclusion that is not catastrophic for Ukraine and Russia and the rest of the world who's been watching this now for years, pining for it to end.
Yeah, I think a lot of the frustration has been a lack of discretion when it comes to this issue, right? It's not that the vast majority of people don't think that Russia was wrong to invade another sovereign country. I think it's the lack of understanding that, look, maybe there's the potential that both countries here have some corruption going on. I think it's been no mystery, like you alluded to, Dan, that Ukraine has a corrupt government and has had a corrupt government for years, and there's evidence of that. But I think a lot of the talking points from the left have been that Ukraine is completely innocent of all
Right.
wrongdoing here ever, and Russia is evil. And I think the reality is that both things can be true, right? What Russia is doing is terrible. Putin is without a doubt a dictator, and he's looking out for himself and to grow his empire as he sees it. And Ukraine is a victim of that, but they also have their own corruption that they have dealt with, and Zelensky is not above some of that corruption. And then I think to what you were saying, Billy, a lot of these probably kind of uncomfortable, a little bit difficult, and weird conversations have been happening diplomatically for years with other leaders, right? Calling them these things and negotiating and giving things up. But now we have social media. One, we have a president who puts everything out there on social media. But two, we have social media and a lot of technology that enables us to see a lot of these backdoor conversations that probably have been going on with leaders for a long, long time. But now the general public is kind of getting an insight into it, and it makes us a little bit uncomfortable, but it's probably not as abnormal as we think it is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And if you want to learn more on this topic, definitely check out our conversation with CBN's George Thomas on the YouTube channel earlier this week. And also later today, I will be speaking with Jason Buttrill, who's former Department of Defense and now commentator on The Blaze. And he really has good perspective and insights on things that are going on around the world as far as it pertains to geopolitics. So you won't want to miss that conversation coming up. All right, we are going to move over to the focus story now. And the head of an organization that combats online anti-Semitism is warning that the current social media dynamic is both unacceptable and dangerous. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, this is interesting. Her name is Tal Or Cohen Montemayor. She's the executive director and founder of Cyberwell. We've covered Cyberwell before on CBN. Her organization really does a very interesting job of having this open database of online anti-Semitism. So they're, a nonprofit that monitors globally what is happening on different social media platforms when it comes to this issue. And they're trying to help the platforms better enforce digital policies and have standards to really remove that anti-Semitic content when it does pop up on those platforms. But we spoke with her, and really she talked quite a bit about how, because of the October 7th attacks, there was this, what she called the first successful hijacking of our social media platforms by the terrorist group Hamas, meaning you suddenly were seeing repeated cycles of flooding social media with violence and anti-Jewish sentiment, and it was all in the algorithm, and it happened right after the attacks. And so she said we've seen that on repeat with other issues that have happened since October 7th. And obviously, this is a cycle of pushing harm and hatred towards Jewish people online that has her and her organization very, very concerned.
And what has she said about, we saw it happen and it was crazy, the Super Bowl with Kanye West and his shenanigans going on, and really his anti-Semitism that has been horrific, selling swastika shirts and things like that. What's been her response there?
Yeah, that was really the thing that sparked our discussion. Really, obviously, she was deeply disturbed by it. She said it's not the first time that we've seen this rhetoric from him. And she said, really, the issue is that he's putting this behavior on social media platforms in the algorithm. She talked about the fact that he has 32 million. I think he's over 33 million now. At the time we spoke, it was 32 million followers. And so when he puts a message out there, it's really out of control because it reaches so many people. She said the glorification of Hitler is absolutely something beyond the pale. And she said it becomes amplified when you put it on social media and when you are putting it out to millions and millions of people. So really, really problematic. She said you have a situation with Kanye where there's an echo chamber, again, that is created. So he puts the commentary out, other people echo it, and you have this issue where it spreads sort of like a virus at a time when she said the Jewish community is experiencing what she said one of the worst onslaughts of anti-Semitism ever. She said these are very dangerous messages to be seeing.
What's her advice for social media companies, these major players when it comes to tackling this issue? Because obviously you run into the free speech issue, right? You don't want to be clamping down on free speech, but at the same time, this is pretty horrible stuff.
Yeah, I asked her that question because it's tough, right? You look back at COVID and these other issues where people were restricted for simply sharing a viewpoint. She doesn't really see this as free speech in the same way because you're using these platforms, and this is a debate that people have, right? Her job at Cyberwell is to sort of step in the gap and help social media companies navigate that line between censorship and what is actually a violation of terms. So she will very well know sort of what the terms are for each platform, and we'll try to hold the platform to that. Like, hey, Kanye West said this violates your terms. So they'll try to flag those things and say, look, you need to do something about this because the terms you've laid out actually show that this is something that you shouldn't be allowing. And so she really, that's really where she is on this. She said that really just because it's a social media platform does not mean it's unfettered free speech, that you can call these sorts of things out and you can remove them. And she specifically said, look, she's like, if you looked at the language of Kanye West tweets, this is easily something that we can create automated tools to actually enforce digital policies at scale. She said, every American knows that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Why? Because people are going to get hurt. And she said, when it comes to the Jewish community, we're already in a crowded theater and people are hitting us with live fire. And so she just talked about being vigilant. She encouraged Meta and obviously Meta's pulled back on a lot of this, and X to, when it comes to this sort of thing, take a stand against it.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly a disturbing trend that we've seen, guys, over the past, since October 7th, really. I mean, we've seen it before that, but you really would have thought after October 7th that maybe some of this would have subsided, but it's only increased. It's gotten worse. And then when you have somebody who's obviously as mentally ill as Kanye West and the platform he has, unfortunately, I mean, imagine having enough money to just blow on a Super Bowl commercial where he's just sitting there with his iPhone or whatever, filming himself saying, go to this site, and it's got t-shirts with a swastika on them, and he's ranting anti-Semitic comments. It's very troubling. And first of all, maybe the Super Bowl, maybe they didn't know, these networks didn't know that what he was promoting with the site, because it was just whatever his website is. I'm not even going to say it. So maybe they didn't know. Maybe he changed it out too late after the fact, and there was nothing they could do. But just, it is disturbing. And the fact that people are willing to, I mean, we just had the news this week, guys, of finding out that Hamas did kill this entire family, including a mom and 2 young children. Obviously, any deaths are horrible at the way they did this. But when you can stoop to killing women and children, it's despicable and evil beyond belief.
Yeah, as far as the Super Bowl commercial, I believe that he initially was promoting like a bunch of other stuff, and then he changed the website, once people started going to it, talking about Kanye. But I think this is kind of a tricky issue, like you said, with the free speech, kind of weighing in the balance, and you want to be deferential to that, but also you don't want to create an environment where people can say whatever vitriolic, disgusting thing they want to on social media. So finding that balance, I think, is difficult, especially now when so many conservatives are distrusting of these kinds of algorithms that she was talking about that you could put in place, because so many of them have been misused, intending to abuse people who have conservative perspectives or of a Christian worldview. So I think, unfortunately, social media platforms have put themselves in a tough situation, because we can all agree that this kind of anti-Semitism is disgusting and doesn't have a place in our public sphere. But finding tools to combat that are becoming increasingly difficult, because social media companies have created a lack of trust with how they've handled this stuff in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Billy, any final thoughts there?
It doesn't seem complicated if somebody's praising Hitler and attacking a group of people like that. This is not the same as saying maybe the COVID virus came from a lab. I mean, these are different things. Like so I don't.
But they were
I understand
treated
her
the
point.
same.
They were
in some ways.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we need to be vigilant here, and we need to preserve, like we talked about, right? You've got to balance that. You can't. Sometimes the best disinfectant is sunlight, right? Like let these horrible views out in the open, free speech, and then let them get destroyed by others who are combating that, right? Sometimes you just need to do that. You can't just whack-a-mole everything down. But it is a balance to walk because there's certain things you just aren't acceptable no matter how much free speech we're allowed. That there's consequences to the things you say as well. So yeah. But appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today, Billy. And that's going to lead us into the main thing here now. And Brazil's on the brink of this religious transformation happening right now. It's typically been very heavy Catholic, still is, but evangelicals are kind of surging, and they could be outnumbering Catholics here pretty soon. So what is driving the shift? Well, CBN's George Thomas has more on that for today's main thing.
In the heart of Brazil, amidst the rhythmic beats of samba and the vibrant colors of Carnival, something spiritually profound is unfolding.
We are on the verge of a religious change in Brazil.
Sociologist Jose Alves tells CBN News that if there's one image that symbolizes Catholicism's influence here, it's Rio de Janeiro's 98-foot-tall Christ the Redeemer. Inaugurated in 1931, the iconic statue celebrated the country's rich Catholic heritage. 94 years later, Alves says the faith's dominance is rapidly declining.
In 1950, 93% of Brazilians identified as Catholics. The church was losing about 1% of followers every decade. However, from 1991 onwards, the Catholic Church started to lose 1% of followers every year, resulting in a dramatic drop.
Evangelical Christianity, once a minority faith here, is now growing at unprecedented levels.
What you're looking at there on your screen is this beautiful blue structure known as the Cathedral of Brasilia. It is one of the largest Catholic churches here in Brazil's capital city. The surveys show that what was once the world's largest Catholic nation will by 2030 be overwhelmingly evangelical.
Signs of this growth are everywhere. Megachurches dotting the landscape, filled with thousands of worshipers each week. From Andrea Fernandez's church in Sao Paulo,
we are living in the fulfillment of a promise. For many decades, we have heard that Brazil would experience a wave of revival that would be exported around the world. And I believe that this is what we are experiencing at this moment.
To Lurival Pereira's congregation in the Amazon region, boasting more than 10,000 members across some 600 cell groups.
The foundation of our growth is these cells. The real revival is taking place outside the church walls. Every day, people are meeting in small groups in homes. It's the biblical model.
To J.B. Carvalho's church in the capital city of Brasilia.
We started the church in 2003 with only 25 people. Today, we have about 12,000 people in Brasilia alone. We also have another 15,000 people in Fortaleza. Our churches are spread throughout Brazil.
To Silas Malafais's church in Rio de Janeiro, one of the largest and most influential Pentecostal churches in Brazil, with more than 100,000 members.
In the next 7 years or so, we will be the majority in the country. Today, we make up about 35% of the population, and God's kingdom has influence in every corner of Brazilian society.
Marcelo Crivella, a well-known evangelical pastor turned politician, once served as mayor of Rio de Janeiro. He says that years ago, evangelical Christians hesitated to get involved in politics, but that's no longer the case. More than 30% of the country's legislators are now evangelical.
We are more than 140 deputies and more than 20 senators.
Many of them gather each Wednesday in the halls of Brazil's Congress for worship and prayer. The country's first evangelical church opened in 1922. By 1990, that number had grown to more than 7,000 congregations. Nearly 30 years later, it grew to over 109,000. The growth so staggering that one study found 70 new evangelical churches opening every day across Brazil.
Now in Brazil, 550,000 churches.
Ezanete Rodriguez says this dramatic transformation began, as in many great movements, with the most profound of practices, prayer.
I've always believed that prayer is like planting. You plant, 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 and at some point it will sprout, and then the explosion will come.
Those who have been tracking the explosive growth of the evangelical movement here in Brazil say worship has played a monumental role in the church's growth. And one Christian artist, above all, has been at the center of it all.
Her name is Ana Paula Valadão.
Even growing up, I had glimpses of crowds, of multitudes worshiping the Lord.
From the late 1990s to the early 2000s, her group's music became synonymous with a powerful worship movement that emphasized intimacy with God, passionate worship, and personal revival.
As I was songwriting, the Lord always made me very intentional. And the whole idea was about transformation, was about changing the nations.
She held concerts in strategic locations, drawing millions of people, many of whom were Catholics.
Like the carnival site in Rio de Janeiro, and we filled every soccer stadium in this nation. Jesus broke every record, gathering more people than any soccer tournament.
Because of her songs, many Catholic services in Brazil today, like one CBN News attended in Sao Paulo, have embraced a more evangelistic style of worship, shifting away from traditional liturgies to incorporate contemporary music. Father Antonio Luis Ferreira, who leads the Cathedral of São Sebastião in Rio de Janeiro, says the change is part of an effort to encourage former Catholics to come home.
People are attracted to environments where worship celebrations and moments of prayer are done in a more charismatic way. Today, a growing number of Catholics are returning precisely because prayer meetings are conducted in a more Pentecostal style.
Still, for Brazil's Catholic majority, the question is no longer whether they will lose their dominance, but how quickly. The answer? Probably faster than anyone ever expected. George Thomas, CBN News, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
All right, George, thanks for that conversation there. Really, that report, really appreciate that. It's really good to see that happening down there in South America. All right, that's going to leave us with time on this Friday Junior edition of the Quick Start Podcast for one last thing.
We're looking at Galatians 6:7. It says, "Don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant."
That is, I don't know, that's a convicting one, right? You'll always harvest what you plant, and you can't mock the justice of God. So it makes us think about our own whims, cultural whims, and the dangers of following them.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, and also, too, when we're thinking about like taking justice into our own hands or vengeance into our own hands, just realizing that God's got this, right? So we don't have to take those matters necessarily into our own hands, right? And that's tough to do. We want to do that naturally. We want to like make the justice here and make it our own, but ultimately God's going to have that final say. All right, good spot to leave it there on the Quick Start Podcast. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com, faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back tomorrow with more. God bless. See you then.